Ed Lehman, who was at that time a student at Illinois Wesleyan University. The railroad yard in which we are presently standing was at that time a popcorn field, about 6 feet lower in the middle than at either end, and we had to do a great deal of bulldozing in here before we could get things ready to lay our track. All of the work out here was done by volunteer labor with a large number of hours of, if I may paraphrase someone else, a great deal of blood, tears, toil, and sweat. I'm Charlie Day. I'm the traveling engineer for the Monticello and Sangamon Valley Railway Historical Society. The traveling engineer's function is basically that of training locomotive engineers and firemen and overseeing the operation of the motive power, the steam motive power in this case. With me is Tom Scott Jr., who has been with our organization for several years and has become one of our qualified engineers as well, and is going to be helping with the demonstrations that we'll be putting on for you of firing and operating steam locomotives. The locomotive that we're going to be working with primarily is our museum's number 1. This engine originally belonged to Western Indiana Aggregate and Stone in Montezuma, Indiana. They quit using it in 1960 and shunted it out to the end of one of their tracks, where it stayed rusting away until 1966 when our organization purchased it. We have been using it out here since 1971. It is our main operational locomotive. It was built in 1930. The tender that we are using was donated by the Illinois Central Railroad, and to the best of the knowledge of some of their people was originally used on one of their 440s or 460s. So it is an old tender. It actually has the curlicue hook on the back for hanging a coal oil lantern on it. So it's right in keeping with our operational theme here. I would suggest to anybody that operates one of these things or that is contemplating doing it that they try to find copies of some of the old locomotive catechisms or books like that. They cost money, but if you can find them, they're worth having, because they describe all this stuff in detail and describe the problems that can happen and how to go about fixing them. I've got a couple I brought along just as samples. This is one that's on the locomotive and the air brake, put out by the International Correspondence Schools of Scranton, Pennsylvania, years and years ago. Of course, they have a whole series of these. And there's another one that's a standard Forney's Catechism of the Locomotive. And there's Grimshaw's Locomotive Catechism. One of these, I believe, Grimshaw's, I think, has been recently reprinted.
Where do you search these books out?
Most of these I have found in closeouts at old big city libraries or university libraries, things like that. Where they're needing space and they find they've got certain books that haven't been checked out since 1910 or something like that, and so they put them on sale. That's the cheapest way to find them. If you find them at Railroadiana sales and things like that, they're going to cost you considerable more. Mm-hmm. What you are looking at here is a cutaway section of an Atlantic-type steam locomotive. It's cut away so that you can see the interior of the locomotive as to how it actually works. Basically, the operation of this thing is very simple. The fire in the firebox will boil the water and create steam, which collects above the water level in the upper part of the boiler. When the engineer pulls on the throttle back in the cab, the throttle valve here is opened, permitting steam from the boiler to come into the dry pipe. In this case, it's going to go through the superheater tubes because this engine is superheated, and then down into the valve. From the valve, the steam will be admitted into the cylinder to push the piston in the desired direction, whether you're running forwards or backwards. And of course, as this piston moves, it's connected by a wrist pin at the crosshead to the main drive rod, and it transmits its motion and energy to this main drive rod, which is connected at the main crank to one of the drivers. And of course, all the drivers are coupled together then by the connecting rods or side rods, so this push is transmitted to all the drivers. The exhaust steam from the cylinders on the exhaust stroke will go up the smokestack, and the chugging noise that you hear on the engine is actually the exhaust steam being fired up the stack. This also creates a draft on the fire. When the engine is running, the way that you get the proper draft through the fire here is the exhaust steam creates a partial vacuum in the smoke box in the front end of the engine. and air, of course, tries to fill that partial vacuum. Now, the only way it can do it is by coming up through the grates down here, through the fire, through the flues, and then into the front end, thus creating the draft on the fire to make the fire burn. Now, the harder the engine is working, the stronger the exhaust steam blast will be from the stack. The greater the draft coming through the fire, the harder the fire will burn. And of course, then as you use this steam, the water level is going to drop, and so you're going to have to continuously feed water from the tender. And of course, the coal bunker in the tender is surrounded by water. You'll feed that water back into the boiler to keep the water level in the boiler above the crown sheet.
Could you explain what the crown sheet is?
Okay, the crown sheet is basically just the top of the firebox. Now, even though the water all around the firebox is boiling, that water is still cool enough to protect this crown sheet, even with the fire roaring away in there. What happens if the water level drops below the top of this crown sheet, and thus loses the cooling factor of the water? That sheet will get so red hot that the metal will begin to melt around the stay bolts that hold the firebox into the boiler, and as that softens up, it will give way, and the force of the steam will blast down through the firebox. And your classic boiler explosion, of course, is the steam blasting through the firebox and the boiler itself being catapulted forward off the engine, frequently leaving the smoke box and the tender and a vacant space in between. And of course, part of that vacant space was the crew. There are very few survivors of boiler explosions.
We're inside the firebox now. These are the inner sheets of the boiler. There's an outer shell around this where the water goes, and therefore this room here is completely surrounded by water in between the inner, which is these, and the outer sheets, and the outer shell. All right, this sheet right here is the flue sheet. And you see all these flue ends in here. The flue sheets are usually a lot thicker than the side sheets because they have all these holes in them, which weakens them, and they also have to support the weight of the flues on this end of them. These bolts right here are called stay bolts. They join the inner and the outer sheets and give it a little strength in there. They are about probably about like that long in there, and they're threaded in. The threads are on both the inner and outer sheet, and we thread them in just like a screw, and then we beat them over on the outside so they have a little more holding power. And then there's a hole drilled in them on the inside and on the outside to a depth greater than that of the sheet, so when they break, all the water and steam hissing out of it will reveal that break. The reason that we only have to drill it in just past the sheet is because stay bolts normally break just at the sheet level, because that's where the most expansion and contraction between the inner and outer sheets are. And there is a lot of expansion and contraction because, like, these inner sheets are exposed to 3,000 degrees heat, and the outside is exposed to atmospheric temperature, so there's a lot of temperature difference there. These are the side sheets on the sides here, and the roof up here is called the crown sheet. These crown stays up here are similar to the stay bolts, only they are about 2 to 3 feet long in some places. This particular boiler has what we call radial stay bolts, and that is that they are radial to the cylindrical form of the outside of the boiler, but they have to be at right angles to this crown sheet for maximum strength. But since there really is no position where that occurs exactly, the best that you can do is approximate it, so which leads you get unequal tensions in the bolts, and which causes some deformity in the outer sheet sometimes on bigger engines. These are plugs right here that have been driven into leaking flues to stop the leaks temporarily. The foundation ring, or mud ring as some people call it, is a ring that runs between the two sheets, this inner and the outer sheets out here, and runs all the way around the whole firebox here. It's riveted together between the two with these rivets right here, you can see, and that gives a steam tight joint there. This is the lowest part of the boiler around here, so all the sediment and stuff collects down here, and it's called commonly boiler mud, and that's one place this gets its name. It often has to be cleaned out of the boiler by boiler washing, because if this mud is allowed to build up in here, it'll cause water to lose contact with the sheets here and mud burn the sheets. Okay, these right here are the studs that held up the foundation for the grates, which went across here basically about this level where we're standing. These are pretty well shot, and we're going to take those out and replace them. But there were long metal or cast iron pieces that went across here to hold up the grates that went back and forth in here. And the grates are rocking units that shake the ashes off the bottom of the fire and drop them into the ash pan, which has been removed in this engine. Or burning fuel in the ash pan and a full ash pan are the major cause of warped and cracked grates. And you can see the outside of the stay bolts in here. These all have holes in them, and most of them are plugged up by little bugs that like to build nests in them right now. These right here is the outside sheet at the foundation ring, where the rivets that came through from the inside are here on the outside and beat it over.
The problem we're dealing with here is several flues in the engine which have been leaking. Seeping cold water around the edge of the flue between the flue pipe and the sheet. So we're going to tighten those up. And the way we're going to do that is using one of these flue rollers. We'll start by putting the roller in the flue, and as you drive the spindle in and turn it, well, the rollers come out and they press the metal in the flue pipe itself against the sides of the sheet, thus tightening up the seal on it. Now that's the way you do it when you're putting a new flue in the boiler to start with too. You'd have just about a 1/4 inch of the pipe sticking out, and you roll it, and then you use a tool called a beading tool to actually bend over, mash over that 1/4 inch that's sticking out and help form another seal against the side of the sheet itself. Now in modern locomotive building, all this was done with air-driven equipment. But as on many short lines, and certainly with most museum operations today, we're going to do it by hand. You get the roller in the flue and oil it. We'll drive the spindle in and crank it. As that turns around, those rollers are pressing the metal of the flue out against the flue sheet itself. And also to help the seal in there, there's a copper ferrule, which is just like a copper bracelet that is very malleable and expands readily itself. Now as it eases up when you turn it, tap it in a little further. We have to be careful that we don't over-roll the flue. Now you can actually break it off at the end, in which case you cut it out, put a new pipe in, and start all over. I've never cracked one off yet. I hope you don't have the opportunity to see the first one here today. And we'll back it out.
How often is this maintenance procedure required?
Oh, we don't have too much problem with this. These flues, you can see there where it smashed a little water out from underneath it. Sometimes with minor leaks, you can stop them just with a beading tool by rolling that edge over a little more. I had to do some of this last year. When you put a new flue pipe in, of course, you've got to bead each flue all the way around to get that lip of metal rolled over like that. We found these leaks by running a hydrostatic test on the boiler. That is, we filled it full of water, sealed up everything, and then pumped more water into it, which put pressure on the boiler, simulating the pressure of the steam. It shows where you have, for instance, leaking flues or leaking stay bolts, anything like that. It's a lot safer than testing it under steam pressure, because if you do have something, for instance, that would be serious and cause a side sheet to crack, something similar, with cold water pressure, it'll just crack and the water will run out. If you had steam pressure on your engine and that happened, you'd have an explosion. If you look up here at the top of the firebox, the crown sheet, you'll see this fusible plug or soft plug that I talked to you earlier about, with its soft alloy core in here. Now, as long as the water stays over the top of this crown sheet to keep that cool, nothing will happen to it. But if the water drops low on the crown sheet, the fire in the firebox will burn that soft core out of there, and the steam will rush down through there and put out the fire, thus preventing a boiler explosion. At one time or another, probably about everything that will burn has been burned in steam locomotives. The big difference in design is that with coal burning engines, you have a large flat grate area to permit air to come through into the firebox to burn the coal. Wood burning fireboxes tend to be very narrow at the bottom and very deep. That is, you may have a rounded portion of the top of the firebox up here, but then it will narrow down and drop down into a deep chamber, which you can keep filled with wood, and the air is sucked in through the grates at the bottom, of course, and it gives the air plenty of time to warm up before it gets up to the flues. Because with wood, of course, you don't have the surface of the grates covered as closely and tightly as you do with coal. You got a lot of airspace. According to the book, the boiler is a high-pressure vessel with all the thereunto pertaining appurtenances for its safe operation. This means basically that it's like a big tea kettle, except that it builds pressure up inside of it, and you've got to have certain things on it to make it work. You've got to have a way to put water into it. You've got to have a way to build a fire to heat up that water. That's the firebox, which actually sits inside the boiler itself. You've got to have a way to use the steam. That means a throttle valve so that the steam can get out of the boiler into your cylinders. You've got to have safety valves so that if the pressure gets too high, you have some way of relieving that excess pressure. And you have to have another valve for cleaning out the boiler, and that's what we call a blowdown valve. Now basically what happens when the engineer sets the valve gear in the position for the desired travel and opens his throttle, the throttle valve in the steam dome will lift, permitting steam to go through the throttle into the standpipe, down through the dry pipes. If we come back here, we can see this a little more. This is the dry pipe coming into the valve. Steam will come through this pipe, down into the valve, then down into the piston, the cylinder, to move the piston. Now as the piston shoves, this rod is going to move, the piston rod, the crosshead itself will move, and of course as it moves, the main rod moves and transmits that motion to the drivers. It's basically that simple. Okay, the main reason for the counterweights on locomotives is simply to offset the weight, balance the crank pins, which are on the opposite side of the wheel. As if you didn't have some sort of a counterweight here, you would have had a lot of extra weight over here, and every time that weight came down on the wheels, on the rails, you'd get a lot of extra thump. It pounds bad enough the way it is right now. If you look at the counterweight on this driver and the counterweight on the following driver, you'll see that the one on the driver I'm standing by is larger. The reason again is very simple. There is more weight on the opposite side of this driver. It's got the main crank pin on it here, and the side rod is also connected into the driver, whereas the one at the back, the last driver on this consolidation, only has the side rod connected on. That's the basic reason for the different sizes in counterweights. It just offsets the weight of the crank pins. Many people are not aware that steam locomotives have tires, which from time to time have to be changed. If you look at the wheel here, what you're looking at from here on in is the wheel hub. This piece out here is the tire. And as that tire gets too worn, it may have to be replaced. And the way that is done is by jacking the engine up off the frame, and you have a tube that fits around through this thing. Now we use a mixture of oxygen and acetylene to heat this tire up to the point that it will expand. Of course it doesn't expand much, but it's enough that it loosens it on this hub, and you pound it off the hub with sledgehammers, and you do the same thing with the new tire. You heat it up and then pound it on and position it over the wheel hub and let it cool down and shrink onto the hub. That's how you change tires, and we've changed all the tires on number 1 that way. Steam locomotives in the United States as well as abroad are classified by wheel arrangements. That basically means how many little wheels do we have up front, and how many drive wheels do we have, and how many little wheels to put in the back, to make it simple. That is the number of wheels in the pony truck or the lead truck, the number of drivers, and the number of wheels in the trailing truck. And we'll get into the reason for the different wheel arrangements that they are. In the United States, this is the white classification system for wheel arrangements of locomotives. Starting with your very simple locomotives, such as number 1 that we have, I actually call that an 040. That is, there are no wheels for a trailing truck. It has 4 drivers and no trailing truck. It's lead truck. No lead truck, 4 drivers, no trailing truck. The other switch engine we have out here is an 060. It has 6 drivers, no lead truck, no trailing truck. This puts all the weight right on the drivers, which is what you actually need when you're switching yards. The more oomph you can get right on the drivers. The earliest both passenger and freight locomotives in this country, when you got past the very basic stages of things like the Tom Thumb and the grasshoppers and things like that, was the 440 arrangement. It had a 4-wheel lead truck and 4 drivers. This was the American Standard locomotive, which served from the earliest days of steam engines right up, well, there were 440s still running right at the end of steam on some branch lines in the south. As trains became longer and heavier engines were required with more pulling power, one evolvement of this was to add a 1-axle trailing truck in the back, so that we had a 442, which was the Atlantic classification. The original Atlantics had a rigid trailing truck, and the later ones had one on a swivel. And the reason for the trailing truck was to help support a bigger firebox. Firebox could come back further. Another advance in the design was the 460, which is just called the 10-wheeler. That was used in both passenger and freight service. The high-drivered engines were used in passenger service for speed. The low-drivered engines were used in freight service for pulling power. From this, the next development in the passenger locomotive was to add a trailing truck to support a bigger firebox. At our 462, which was the Pacific locomotive, the standard locomotive for pulling passenger trains in this country for many years. The evolution of freight locomotives we started out pretty much as engines began to develop past the 440 stage with the 260, which was called the Mogul. And then to support a heavier firebox, we added a truck back here. That's the Prairie class locomotive. Another step that it took to get a longer boiler was 1 lead axle and 8 drivers. The consolidation, such as the 401 that we have out here on the property. And then they needed more oomph there, so we put a trailing truck behind it and came up with the Mikado, named originally for the Emperor of Japan because the first of these were sent to Japan to use on the railroad there. There was an effort during the Second World War to rename them MacArthur's, but that never really caught on. Wheel arrangement progressed to the point that on some railroads we came up with articulated locomotives. This means basically one large boiler, make this very crude here, with an engine that is so big that to make the curves on the track, a single rigid frame could not make the curves. So we came up with engines that had 2 sets of cylinders, and in some cases as many as 4 884s, the Union Pacific Big Boys, for instance. And these 2 frames were actually hinged in the middle, so they pivoted. If you look at one of these from the head end coming down the line, you see the wheels start to make the curve around the corner, and the boiler is still going straight the way it was. Now there's a basic reason for putting the lead truck on any engine as well. It bears only a small portion of the weight really, but when it comes to a curve, what it does is help begin to guide that very massive locomotive with its speed and its velocity around that curve. If it were not for that lead truck, when you hit the curve, the drivers might try to climb the rails. That's why you don't run switch engines that have no lead truck at high rates of speed, because there's a limit beyond which the flanges will not hold the wheels on the rail. So that's the basic purpose for that lead truck. And there were all sorts of other wheel arrangements thought up by different railroads. The 484 became a passenger engine. New York Central used them, Union Pacific used them, a lot of other railroads. And that's basically how your steam engines are classified, and there are charts available for those interested in all the different types of classifications that would more than fill up our tender here. But that gives you an idea of how these are arranged. What we're going to look at briefly now is the suspension system of the locomotive. This diagram will give you briefly a general idea of how the parts of this suspension system are hooked up. And what you're looking at here is a 282 freight engine, a Mikado. You can see the various parts are labeled. S is the springs, E are the equalizers, F indicates the point of fulcrum for the equalizers. What basically happens here is, take for example in this diagram, for some reason or another the third driver has hit a bump, a high joint in the rail or something. As that driver kicks up, you can see by the arrows the direction of the springs and equalizers here as they immediately move, and this is equalized on both sides of the locomotive as well through the action of the transverse equalizer and things like that, to keep the other wheels on the rails so that we don't have everything suddenly tip up off the rail on one side like you might have if you didn't have any equalizers at all on it. If you want to look just briefly here at the engine, you can see on this locomotive what part of this is. Here you see the spring, and these are the spring hangers which are fixed to the frame, so that as we hit bumps out on the line and the whole engine rocks and rolls, it keeps the thing suspended so that the weight and the force of the weight is evenly distributed throughout the system. We are now in the front end of the locomotive known as the smoke box. It's not an integral part of the boiler, it's in front of the boiler. It's through this smoke box that the draft is regulated on the fire. If you look clear at the back of the smoke box, you'll be able to see, barely probably in here, the front flue sheet, which is actually the front end of the boiler, and all of the flue pipes ending here. Now these flue pipes carry the smoke and superheated air through the boiler and out into the smoke box, and from here they will go up the smokestack and out into the atmosphere. Now we talked a little bit ago about the throttle being opened and steam being admitted into the valves through the dry pipe. Here you see the dry pipes, one coming down to either valve. Now through these the steam is admitted into the valves and then the cylinders. And when that steam has been used, the exhaust steam is shot up through what we call the blast pipe, which is this particular pipe right here coming up through the table plate and ending right here. Now that exhaust steam is shot up through that blast pipe, through this pipe which is known as the petticoat pipe, and then out the stack. Now it's that exhaust steam that creates the draft on the fire, because every time it exhausts through here it creates a partial vacuum in this smoke box. Now the only place that air can come in to replace that partial vacuum is through the grates, through the fire, through the flues, and back up here. The chugging sound that is so beloved on steam locomotives by rail fans is actually the exhaust steam being shot up the blast pipe, through the petticoat pipe, and out the smokestack. This ring that you see around here with all the little jets on it is the blower ring. If the engine is not working at the moment and for some reason you need to put a draft on the fire or to keep poor coal burning, to inspect the fire because you want to inject water, you can create an artificial draft on it by turning on the blower, which just basically fires steam up this stack and creates a draft on it. Now this particular blower has a ring attachment. Number one just has a small simple pipe that sticks up alongside the blast pipe in it. So the smoke box is very important to the draft in the engine. A lot of problems can be caused by things wrong up here.
This engine hasn't been fired up yet. What are you going to have to do first to get it going?
Well, first thing I'll do is shake out the grates here, which still has the old fire on it from last weekend, and take the stack cover off so I won't gas myself when I put a fire in there, and just open up the cab and stuff like that.
Okay, well if you want to start your work, just go ahead with it.
Okay. Now we're starting a new fire in here. We're going to shake out the old one, which has gone out last night. And these grates in here are movable so that we can shake out the old fire and also clean the ashes off the bottom of the fire when it's burning. There's 3 degrees of moving the grates here, but the full stroke is what I just used to dump the fire out. The half stroke would be to get rid of heavy accumulation of ashes in a fire, and just a wiggling like that would be for getting rid of just the fly ash in the bottom. And now I gotta rake out the ashes out of the ash pan. As the ash pan fills up, the hot ashes that fall on top keep building up, and then when they get high enough they'll burn the grates and the shaker rods and warp them, and then you have to replace them. That's not too cool. We always start this thing up on wood and then convert it over to coal. Okay, now we douse a little Caro. This carroll is next to a little paint because we're using this for a paint can today, and that's the case, so that'll still burn. We usually try to light this fire in several different places so we make sure it burns.
Here you see the 3 tricocks. The main one you're concerned with is keeping water in the bottom one. As you can see, water is flowing out of there. We try to carry water in the bottom gauge cock and a mixture of steam and water in the second one. Steam at the top one. On the other side is the water glass, which is a dual safety check on the level of the water in the boiler. You can see the water level is right here at the moment.
What have you yet to do before you start?
The main things we've got to do is we get up to about 100 pounds. We'll warm up the air pump and get it going, get the generator going. When we get the engine to where we can move it, we'll take it out and blow down the boiler to help clean out the sediment before we get going and get that all stirred up again. Make a visual and check that things are operating properly, that nuts that are supposed to be tight are tight, and things aren't slopping around. Needs to be done every time. And when we have all that done, we'll couple onto our train and pump up the air.
All locomotives have electrical systems on them because electric headlights are required by law now for an operation like this. And to supply that electrical power, locomotives have steam-powered turbo generators. Steam comes in through this pipe right here into this turbine and runs out. The exhaust is that pipe right there. And the turbine drives the generator, which is on the other side. The power then goes throughout the electrical system and runs the lights, the cab lights, and sometimes we have it hooked into the coach. It produces 32 volts DC. Let's turn it on here.
Alright, what we're looking at here is a single long air compressor to provide the compressed air for the air reduction brake system on the locomotive. Modern air brakes use an air reduction system. That is, you use air pressure to hold the brakes off. And by reducing your air pressure, you apply the brakes. This means that if for some reason the train breaks in two and the air hoses are torn apart, all the brakes slam into emergency and you stop. With the older straight air version of the brake system, you pumped up the brakes. And with the straight air, if you lost your air pressure, you were out of luck because you had no brakes. This pump consists basically of 2 ends, a steam end up here, and the air end down here. The piston, of course, shaft moves up and down through here. Now the upper end of the pump is oiled with the hydrostatic lubricator in the cab. This is the oil cup for the steam end is oiled with the hydrostatic lubricator in the cab. The air end is oiled from here, and this particular oiler is for the piston in between. Air is pulled into the compressor through this strainer in the air intake here in the lower end. And as the air is compressed by this pump then, the exhaust steam feeds through this pipe into the smoke box and then up the stack. And the air that has been compressed is fed into these reservoirs. This is the main reservoir. There's another reservoir tank like that on the other side of the engine as well with a crossover pipe between them. And this is where the compressed air is stored for keeping the brake system throughout the train pumped up. This is the hydrostatic lubricator for the air pump. What this basically does is provide lubrication for the air compressor to the brake system. It works rather simply. You fill the oil chamber with oil, and when you turn on the steam line to the lubricator, the steam will come into the lubricator, will condense, and of course oil floats on top of water. The water is forced down into the bottom of this mechanism, and when you open up the feed valve on it, the oil then has someplace it can go, and so the steam pushing down on it will force the oil, which is floating up through the water, out and into the oil line, which is over here, to the lubricator. Eventually then, as all of your oil is used, it fills up with water, and what you have to do when that happens is shut it off, drain it down, refill it with oil, and start the whole system over again. This can be done while you're running. You do have to make sure, though, that the pressure is completely off of it before you take out the fill plug. I was firing for one engineer once upon a time on another railroad who forgot to do that, and he got the plug loose when it still had pressure in it, and we had the best lubricated cab roof and boiler backhead of any engine you've ever seen. Basic cab controls of the steam locomotive are fairly simple, particularly on this engine, which doesn't have a lot of the fancy appurtenances that your bigger locomotives had. This brake is the independent brake. It controls the locomotive alone. On this particular engine, this brake is operated by steam. On your more modern engines, of course, it was operated by air along with the regular train brake. Train brake itself is used for applying brakes throughout the train. It's also called the automatic brake. This particular brake stand is an M24C brake stand. To make a brake reduction on it, I move the valve from the run handle from the running position to apply. When I get as much reduction of pressure as I want, I then put the valve in the lap position, and that holds then the amount of reduction that I've made. When I'm ready to release it, I put it back in release. The throttle then controls the admission of steam from the boiler into the valve chest, and then from the valve chest it goes into the cylinders. The further back you pull the throttle, the more steam is going to be admitted through the throttle valve, which is up in the steam dome on top of the boiler, into the valve system. The Johnson bar, which is a manual reverse, is sitting right now in what they call the center position, which is neutral. The locomotive will not move in either direction with the Johnson bar in this position. By throwing the Johnson bar all the way forward, you can start the locomotive moving in forward gear. Now this controls not only the direction the engine travels, but also the length of time during stroke of the piston that steam is admitted from the valve into the cylinder. And shortly we'll be going to the outside of the locomotive in order to show you the motion that transpires there when you throw this gear. Once you get the engine running, by shortening up toward center on this Johnson bar, it's known as cutting off. You're actually reducing the length of time during stroke of the piston that steam is admitted into the cylinder, so you're not using as much steam. What you're working with is the expansive power of the steam then, rather than the volume of steam. Since you're not using as much steam, you're burning less coal, and therefore it's more economical to run the locomotive that way. The position in which it is most economical, that is, at which you get the most efficient use out of the locomotive with the least amount of fuel, was usually referred to as the company notch, because that's the one that the company wanted you to spend most of your time running in. The cutaway drawing we have up here on the running board shows the valve gear for the Stevenson gear system, which is what our locomotive number 1 has. By looking at this drawing, then we'll go to the actual parts on the locomotive so you can see a little closer what some of this involves. In the forward position, motion of the link is controlled by the forward motion eccentric rod, and the block is brought up here in the link to the top position. In the reverse position, the reverse motion eccentric rod will control the operation of the link and will drop the block down into the bottom. Actually, it's the link that moves, the block stays in the same position. The changing of position of this link will cause the valve rod, and thus we take a look down here, the valve rod will be adjusted the position of the valve here in the steam chest itself. If you look at the cutaway that we have here, we see the valve rod, the valve stem, and the valve itself here on top of the cylinder. Adjusting the reverse motion for forward or reverse, whichever way you want to go, will position this valve so that steam is fed into the cylinder in an appropriate position to move the train in the direction you want to go. And of course, when you throw it in reverse in the other direction, the valve position will be changed again. Let's take a look down here. At the actual link itself. And I'll have the reverse gear thrown into the reverse position, and you'll see the linkage move so that the block is in the bottom of the link then. And to put it in forward position, the link will move so that the block is in the top of the link. Following that motion, you'll see the rocker arm here move as it adjusts the valve rod itself, changing the position of the valve up here in the valve chest so that steam will be admitted into the piston in the desired direction of travel. This instrument is a Nathan monitor injector. It's an older pattern of an injector used for feeding water into the boiler. Turn the water on by opening the priming valve. We'll pick water up from the tender into the injector, then cut the feed on, shut the primer off. And we're now feeding water into the boiler. When we get as much water as we want in the boiler, we shut it off and turn the water off. Okay, going from the actual operation of the injector to this cutaway drawing, I think we can give you a little better idea of how an injector actually operates. Now please remember when looking at this cutaway that these tubes actually belong in the body of the injector itself here. Steam comes into the injector from the boiler through this line. This is the water intake from the tender. Now when the operator of the injector primes the injector, what he is doing is causing a little bit of steam to blow across this pipe, creating a vacuum on the feed line from the tender, lifting water up into the injector. When you open the feed then wide itself, admitting steam to the injector, steam mixes with the water in this series of combining tubes and nozzles and imparts its velocity to the water. And it's this velocity that permits the water being forced through the delivery tube to overcome the pressure against the check valve going into the boiler. Theoretically, it should be impossible to overcome 150 pounds of boiler pressure with 150 pounds of boiler pressure. But it's this conversion in the injector from a pressure head to a velocity head that makes it possible to do that. And very simply, that's how your injector operates. Left-hand injector on our locomotive is a different style than the other. Here we see the fireman turning the water valve. Now he's priming it, pulling the lever back just a little bit to prime it, to pick the water up and pull it into the injector. Then he pulled the feed valve all the way back, and that combines the steam from the boiler with the water from the tender through the combining valves. It'll then come down the feed water delivery pipe through this check valve. Now this check valve is a one-way valve. When the water and steam mixed, the pressure head converted to a velocity head hits this valve. Even though there's 150 pounds of boiler pressure on the other side, it kicks it up, kicks it open, and the water is forced into the boiler. As soon as he shuts that injector off, as he just did, the boiler pressure will cause that valve to seat back down so that water from the boiler cannot flow back through this line and out onto the ground. Down on the cab floor are the cylinder cocks. These are drains in the bottom of the cylinders to permit water that accumulates from condensing steam to be drained from the cylinder. Since water itself does not compress, if you did not clear the cylinders of water as you began to move, you'd wind up blowing your cylinder heads off. Once we get going, what I would do then is close the valves, and we'd not be losing any steam out of the cylinder through the cylinder cocks then.
This is the crosshead oiler we're filling up now. This red oil is Journal Guard. We get it from a company called Interlube. It's made especially for lubrication of journals and this stuff. These are the driving boxes being oiled now. There's a waste packing on top there, and then they got oil holes that go down to the brass. Oiling the valve gear. This is Stevenson valve gear here. Another driving box. And the eccentrics. There's two of them for each valve. Hey, this is valve oil here, used to lubricate the piston rods and the valve stem here. This valve oil is a high temperature stuff. That's why we use it. We can use it in the valves and the steam cylinders here, because this other oil just bakes right on in there, and this valve oil doesn't bake on and will lubricate it.
Is this engine equipped with any automatic lubrication at all?
Yeah, right here. This is the mechanical lubricator to the valves. We have to fill that about once a day.
How does it work?
Well, this rod right here that runs from this valve stem up to this crank here works back and forth when the engine is running, and there's a pump in there that pumps oil out these into these pipes and to the various each steam chest, this one and on the other side, and then up to the steam brakes in the cab. I guess I'll grease the pins now. This is our pin grease, and this stuff comes in blocks, and we cut it up and put it in this gun. You can usually stand on the blocks because this stuff is so thick. Okay, that's the steam pressure gauge there. It'll register steam pressure when we get any. It's still working on it in there. This right here is the air pump turn on, or the air pump valve. This right here is the blower. This is the main turn on or valve that turns on or off the steam supply to the injector. This right here is steam heat. We use this during our Christmas runs or on days when it's a little bit cool out here, like fall and stuff like that.
How much steam does it take to heat these cars? I would imagine it would tax this engine.
Well, right here is our steam heat gauge, and we usually run about 10 or 15 pounds of steam in the train line, and that keeps it pretty warm. And right here's the regulator that regulates pressure going into the steam line.
Could you give an explanation to what that noise in the background is?
Okay, the noise in the background is the whistle starting to open up, because right now the engine or the boiler doesn't have enough pressure in it to hold the whistle valve shut. Okay, so it's open and the steam that we're making is going up to the whistle now. Let's see if I can get it to shut here. There. Now, usually when that happens, we can open up the blower because it's making enough steam to make it work. There. Yeah, okay. Got that opened up now. We've got the blower drain open up there, which will start shooting out water up there. Because when we shut this thing down for a night, the steam that's still in there condenses and will make water. So we've got a lot of drains and stuff all over the engine that we leave open so that when we fire it up again, we just blow out the old water and start again there.
Okay, now we've got the drains closed on our pumps. We'll go ahead and close the drains on the reservoirs. There's a tank like this on both sides of the engine to hold the air pressure for operating the brakes. We've got one on the other side. And our equalizing reservoir back here.
What did you call that?
An equalizing reservoir. It's used in distributing the air between the main reservoirs and the brake valve and the train pipe. Firing is an art. There are people who take right to it, and there are people who try it for years and can't do it.
Right there, there's a hole in the fire. It's not burning there, and it's actually a hole there. We try to keep those filled up with coal so that they'll burn.
Can damage occur if you don't do that?
Yeah, because cold air comes in through these holes and hits the sheets and the flues, and then it makes them contract and expand unevenly and starts making stuff leak in there.
In addition to which, the steam pressure drops, and engineers get upset with firemen when that happens. Yeah, we're top at the boiler pressure right now. The safety valve is lifted on the thing. We usually let it lift in the morning just to make sure, you know, that it's still going where it's supposed to. Ready and warm up the cylinders now to work the water out of them. I'll do that by setting my brakes on the engine, and we'll work the valve back and forth with the reverse as we feed steam into it. And you'll be able to see the water gush out of the cylinders down there.
You want to tell us about why you did that?
Okay. Now the main reason I did this is because there's water running like this to the water glass, which means that the boiler was clear full, you know. So we have to drain it out before it gets any more full. And another reason is that when we're just sitting here like this building steam, all the sediment's right at the bottom of the boiler. So if we blow it down now, we can clear most of it out before we get running. When we're running, the water sloshes around in the boiler and starts circulating, and the sediment flows all over the place, and it's harder to get it all out.
Well, we're going to have to back up now and go load coal, because that's the first order of business now that we've got the engine going today.
How much coal does this engine consume?
Oh, we may burn a ton and a half a day, ton to ton and a half a day. We order what is called 4x5 lump. Much smaller than that, and you wind up with too many small pieces of stoker coal, which you can't really use in a hand-fired engine that well. It clogs the grates. You don't get enough airspace through it, and your fire won't burn.
this engine burns on coal.
Right.
What other kind of fuels were used in steam locomotives?
A lot of the modern engines, particularly in areas that were devoid of coal deposits, were run on oil. In some parts of the world, steam locomotives have been run on straw, sugarcane. A lot of sugarcane plantations, the sugarcane engines, they actually burn sugarcane. As I say, at some time or another, probably about anything that can burn has been put in a steam engine to make it go.
Yep.
Now, if you look down in the hatch here, the water is not too low, but you can see some of the braces and baffles, one of the cross braces and the tender right here. And that is one of the baffle plates. There are a series of these baffle plates throughout the tender. And the main purpose of these plates is to prevent the water from surging violently, as in, for instance, an emergency stop or something like that. That has been known to cause derailments before. So it's just sort of a precaution.
Can you feel the sway in the tender when the water's sloshing back and forth?
You can feel the water slosh, yeah. Many people don't realize when they hear these signals that each one has a different meaning, a warning to the public in general, or a meaning to the crew, or an acknowledgement to some particular other signal. So we're going to run through some of them for you so that you get to hear what they are and also get to know what they mean. The first one we're going to use is the proceed signal, go ahead, also called the highball. It's 2 long blasts on the whistle. It gets its name from the fact that many years ago the signal systems consisted of a pole with a ball and a rope on it. When the ball was in the lowered position, that was the stop signal. When they raised it to the top, that's when it was in the high position, it was the go signal, and thus the name highball, which continues even to this day. One of the other commonly heard signals is the backup signal. It is 3 short blasts. Now, 3 short blasts on the whistle when you're standing still means back up. When you're running, it means stop at the next flag stop. Another common signal is 2 short blasts on the whistle. That is simply an answer to any signal for which another answer is not prescribed to the rule book. Anytime the conductor indicates one thing or another to you, you answer with that. Track through signals that it's clear for you to come through, you answer with 2 shorts. If you hit a torpedo on the track, you blow 2 shorts to indicate you've understood. 1 short blast also has 2 different meanings. When you're stopped, it indicates you have indeed stopped all motion of the train and it's safe to let people off. When you're running, it's a call to set the handbrakes. That's one that we don't have to use much anymore, but in days of old when they had straight air on the trains, or even before they had air brakes at all, that was a very desperate plea for help. Another signal which we use out at the museum and which some of the western railroads use, but you don't hear around here very much anymore, is the long and the short. That's a warning signal blown at trestles, curves, bridges, any places where vision might be obscured, and is simply an indication to people that there's a train coming. The most common whistle signal, I suppose, to most people is the grade crossing signal. blown at all public highway and road crossings, by many railroads, also at private crossings. Originally it was 2 long and 2 short blasts, but that was changed to 2 long, 1 short, and 1 long, the last long being held down until you're actually on the crossing itself. Shorts is another signal which is in common usage. It's a call for orders. It can be a call for an order board to set a signal for you. It can be a call to the rear end of the crew that you are now ready to do something and you're waiting their directions. 1 long and 3 shorts is the whistle signal used to indicate to somebody on the rear of the train that you are making an unexpected stop out on the main line and you want the flagman to go out pursuant to Rule 99 and protect the rear of your train so that you are not run into by somebody following. If you need to send somebody out from the front of the train, the engineer sends the fireman out, and since the fireman's right here, he doesn't need a particular whistle signal for that. When you're ready to call the flagman back in, you use either 4 blasts if you're calling him in from the south or the west, and you use 5 blasts if you're calling him in from the north or the east. First signal, I'll just blow one of those for you. We'll call the flagman in from the south. Another signal which you may hear, if you're on the ground and you hear it, is an indication that you may be in the way and you'd better get out of the way. A series of short blasts is a signal blown to indicate that there's someone or something, an animal on the track ahead, and you're trying to get him out of your way. Another signal which you don't hear so much anymore, but which used to be used frequently, was 1 long followed by a series of shorts. That meant that all persons who were within hearing distance of the signal were supposed to render assistance to the train crew. One long blast on the whistle has 2 basic meanings. Normally it is a signal that is sounded when you are approaching a station, a regular stop, just a general warning that you're coming in. You can also use it at other points as a signal given by the engineer to indicate that you are going to make a brake test, either standing or running, and then the people on the rear end of the train take the appropriate action to follow through with the brake test. And that's probably the basic signal. We're backing up with just the engine. We'll turn the backup light on. Just as the law requires operation of the headlight at all times when the engine is motioned forward, we need the backup light while we're moving back with nothing coupled on behind the locomotive. Backup signal from the flagman. And we'll go down and couple onto this cut of cars. keeping in mind that 3 miles an hour is a coupling and 4 miles an hour is a collision. Okay, now we'll stretch it out and make sure that we actually have the coupling made. And we do. You always want to know that you're coupled onto the cars you think you've coupled onto, and don't find that out when the thing goes into emergency after you started pulling away, which I have seen happen before. Brakemen are now going back to check for handbrakes set on the equipment before they signal us to pull out here. Okay, we got a highball. 2 longs to signal to proceed forward. We'll close the cylinder cocks here, set the Johnson bar in full stroke, check back along the train to make sure we're clear, and then crack the throttle and start feeding steam into the cylinders. We've had the engine in full stroke so far. To give steam to the full stroke of the piston, we'll cut off the Johnson bar here a little bit now. Shorten the length of time that we're feeding steam into the cylinders. We're approaching the first crossing on the line. We'll be using the bell as a warning and the standard whistle signal for the crossing. Off on the throttle here somewhat as we're off the steepest part of the grade, coming out of the yard onto a flatter piece of track. Very shortly I'll be blowing 3 shorts on the whistle, which is the signal to stop at the next flag stop. We're going to let a work gang off at the IC connection up here. Shut the throttle off here and set the valve back in full stroke. On a slide valve engine like this, you want to put it in full stroke every time you shut your throttle off so you don't wear the valve at the center by just a short stroke on it. Setting the air here will take off about 10 pounds. And a short to indicate we have stopped. We have a high ball again. Release the air brake. We have pressure back in the drain pipe now. Again, we'll feed steam gradually into the cylinder so we don't jerk the passengers. On the Johnson bar again, so that instead of feeding steam into the cylinder during the full stroke of the piston, we're only feeding steam in for about half the stroke. It's known as working steam expensively. We're using the expanding power of the steam to do the work now, rather than the mass and volume of steam that you need when you're just getting started. shortly here we'll be coming up on another curve. We'll be using the standard long and sharp warning signal in case someone is out of sight around the corner. And beyond that we'll be approaching our half-mile long 2 to 2.5% grade that we'll have to work up a little bit of speed for here. This is another curve, so it's another good place to lean out and check back along the train to make sure there are no problems. Widen out on the throttle a little bit here as we hit the bottom of the hill. Throttle off over the top here, the fireman will put the water on so that we don't pop the safety and thus waste coal. Take off about 10 pounds here on the automatic brake and slow us down on this downgrade a little bit. We're riding with the brake valve in the lap position now, which holds the amount of brake that we've applied. And as we begin to slow down, we'll release it. You clear over there? All clear. The whistle must be kept sounding until you're actually on the crossing. Same with the bell. We're now approaching the end of our run here. And we'll use the automatic brake to keep the slack stretched out in the train so that when we start up again we won't have to pull the slack out of it. Open the cylinder cocks while we're sitting here and set the Johnson bar back into the center position. While we're sitting here, the fireman will shake the grates and work all the dead ash out of the bottom of the fire, using the shovel to help him check for thin spots or dead spots or possible clinkers in the fire bed. He'll now go down and rake the ashes out of the ash pan. It's warm on the engine today, but not nearly as bad as it is on some of our central Illinois days when the humidity will stand at 97 or 98 and the temperature is higher. I had a thermometer hanging around in here at different places once on one such a day. And the coolest place in the engine was back there in the gangway by the tender, and it was 114 back there. It was 122 at head height over the seat boxes, and it went up to 135 by the steam pressure gauge before the thermometer broke. Okay, the flagman is coming in from the crossing and we received a high ball from the conductor, so we'll set the bar in reverse here, close our cylinder cocks again, release the air brakes and signal to back up. How's the crossing over there? Clear, clear here.